roundtable this afternoon.
I personally really want to thank the Water Cooler Symposium for having us here. We love being a part of the program. I think it's a really fun thing to do, and it's a good program to support for the credit union industry, really the future of the industry. And I use the word industry, I don't use the word movement. I'm sorry, it will never happen. What we're going to host here today is one of our Not for CEOs panels, and what we do with our Not for CEOs panels is we want to encourage credit union, young credit union professionals to start and continue their careers within credit unions. And so we offer a variety of topics that we've done this year. First, we covered career development. We covered technology last session in June, and now here today we're going to cover the subject of personal branding and how it affects your professional work life, and as well, I mean, obviously it's going to dip a little into your personal life as well. We want to thank Co-op as the Not for CEOs sponsor, Co-op Financial Services. I want to thank them for that. It's great to have so many of our readers and advertisers even here today. There are so many viewers also live at home, not here with us, though it's good to have a lot of people in the auditorium as well. There's a Twitter feed that we have, hashtag Not for CEOs, that those in our home audience watching on live stream can tweet questions in that they have for our panel. The other thing you can do, and those who are live here, just stand up, raise your hand, ask a question at any time. I want this to be very interactive. I want you guys to ask each other questions, however you want to do it. This is really about you, it's about the audience, it's not about us, or me. So, first, I would like to also recognize, actually, Miriam Vanna Di Giovanni. She's going to be... She's going to be reading the questions that we get in through our Twitter stream. Fingers crossed, that's right. Usually very interactive group, not a problem. And she'll be sharing the questions with us. And as I said, our live audience, if you have a question anytime, raise your hand, stand up, scream, whatever. On stage, I'm joined with three people who have very distinctive personal brands. We have Matt Davis here. He is Innovation Director at Filing, as well as one of the key organizers of this symposium. We have Matt Manji, who is the Chief Culture Officer at Mazuma, which is... and both Matts are also a couple of our Trailblazer 40 Below nominees, honorees, I guess. So congratulations on that. And we have Jean Blish in here. We always like to have a representative of the more seasoned executives. I heard older is not something to use. Seasoned is what I go with. He's general manager in LA. You've seen him a few times this session of the water cooler. So welcome our panel today. And I have a few prepared questions to start it off, but we can definitely take questions, as I said, at any time. First and foremost, I think to kick off the discussion, Jean, yesterday you addressed finding your credit union's identity, the culture. And so what we're going to talk about is finding your identity, your personal brand. And so I wanted each of you to describe what you think your personal brand is and all the different pieces that make it up.
Chicken. Well, that's a good question, because when Twitter started out, you had to you could put your name down, and I thought at that time I didn't think that was wise, because in some sense of the word I wanted to remain a bit anonymous and choose another name that would be unique and maybe see where that went. more as of it was sort of an experiment more than anything. So I was sitting at the kitchen table, I looked up at the kitchen counter, there was a roll of tin foil, I added ing, and tinfoiling came about, and so I put that down on the Twitter, and my blog feed became that too. So it's been interesting when people, oh, you're tinfoiling, and then I go, yeah, I guess I am, and I don't even know who that is.
I figured you are one of those people that put it over their heads,
yeah.
keep the government out of your brain.
Yeah, it's funny, I get that Google feed every day, and that seems to be the common thing, somebody's putting that over their head. But personally, yeah, I don't know what, my personal brand is usually, is what you do, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
You know, and it's funny in Denmark, when you get your identity card, above your name is your occupation. Like, in that culture, your job is basically your identity, even before your name. So I think the challenge, though, is to keep the balance between the two, your personal life and what that entails. And then as you work, you establish who you are and the organizations you belong to and serve, and it continues on.
I think your presentation yesterday, too, gave us insight into who you are as far as following the 7 cooperative principles and things like that, helping people who really need it. And, you know, as for example, the group that you showed, they're all very dirt poor and very happy, as opposed to Americans who tend to have money and not be happy.
It was interesting. So I was talking to somebody this morning, and I mentioned the fact that we brought our children up in a housing co-op, both here and in Denmark. And when we discussed that with our children, was that a good place to be? Because it's looked on as subsidized housing, and I know some of my friends said, what are you living in a co-op for, sort of thing. But the interesting thing is that community that was in that housing co-op is in some ways, and not some ways, similar to what a credit union is. But the interesting fact is that when the kids came home from school, they were all outside, and everybody watched for them. And so there was no planned play time. And there was really, you know, it was the type of place where you could go next door and order a cup of sugar. So there was that element. So yeah, and a large part, you know, co-ops has been a lot of part of my life, and maybe that's a stronger part than I suspect.
Yeah, and that forms who you are. Exactly. Matt, you want to?
Can you repeat the question?
How would you describe, or what do you think is your personal brand?
Well, that's the kicker, isn't it? Because sometimes there's that
Don't
disconnect.
You're
right?
going to give away my next questions.
Oh.
Don't think ahead.
I feel like I've already, half a sentence in and I've already screwed the whole thing up.
She is an editor.
Yeah, you know, for me it was more a matter of, I knew there was stuff that I was, really excited about. Stuff that really got me going, got me thinking. It just kind of feels, everyone kind of has that thing. It just kind of feels like home. Like, I think it's important to you and that it matters and you're willing to invest in it.
Put your mic up to the mouth, Monty.
I talk too loud usually, so I was trying to scare everybody. And so for me, that was leadership, culture, kind of stuff. And so I kind of went out and started trying to find where conversations about that were happening. Right? So I would go on Twitter and start searching hashtags, like leadership, HR, development, culture, whatever it happens to be. And really for me, it wasn't even just a credit union thing. It was, if someone was talking about it inside the credit union space, great. If it was outside the credit union space, which is actually more often that it's outside the credit union space, then I wanted to hop in there. And I started learning an awful lot more about it, and just kind of went from there, really.
And how does that form who you are when you're on your credit union job?
I think it was more a decision for me about not wanting an organization or this will sound a little bit more arrogant than I mean for it to, but not letting an organization determine who I was going to be and what I wanted to do. I wanted to figure out what I wanted to do, what made me come alive, and where I felt like I could, hopefully be most helpful to the most people, and then went out and found stuff that kind of lined up with that.
Matt, your turn.
Well, my original goal, some of you probably know this story, but my original goal was to be completely anonymous. By complete accident, I ended up working in the financial services business. And I fell in love with credit unions. Frankly, absolutely fell in love with credit unions. And to this day, you won't meet somebody who loves credit unions more than me. But I also realized that we deal with a lot of BS that we actually perpetuate, right, as credit union people. And I wanted to have an outlet, not only to sort of voice my opinion about those things, but also to learn from others and connect with the other people the people in this room, frankly, that I met from social media. I met them because I was really interested in what they were saying, and there were conversations that, frankly, I wasn't getting within my organization. So I love credit unions. In many ways, I loved my credit union, but I didn't love it completely, and there were some gaps. And so, Credit Union Warrior became my persona online. But it was supposed to be completely like you weren't supposed to know it was Matt Davis. It was supposed to be Credit Union Warrior, so I didn't get in trouble, and that actually didn't work very well. But I think if you were to it's been, I want to say my brand hasn't been intentional because it hasn't been. You know, I've got strong opinions about certain things. I call myself sort of an intentional outsider, right? Even though now I'm sort of a long-time pro at this, I want to be an outsider to credit unions because I think looking at things with a critical eye is really important. But I struggle with this a little bit because some folks will say, warrior, well, does that mean you're fighting all the time? No, absolutely not. I mean, I think there's some people that say to be critical about credit unions is to bash them. That's not true at all. I mean, I think when you see what we talk about at Symposium, for example, we're not bashing credit unions. We're urging them along. It's like a parent that says, gosh, you can do better than this. And I think that's so true. And I guess if there were a brand that I would say that I'd like to have or like people to think me of, is someone who really is excited about credit unions doing better. And coupling up with the people who sort of share that vision. So anyway, I said it's half intentional and half not. Like I've always sort of felt like I was like this, you know, if you watch Forrest Gump, like you've got this feather that just sort of wherever is it fate, is it, you know, is it your own decisions? But I've published like 300 blog posts, and I was looking, I've actually not published about 120 of them. And that's me sort of censoring myself. So clearly there's some intent, there's something that I've written that I've truly thought and truly believed, but I believe ultimately that it's not worth sharing with the public because that's not what I want people to think of me as. So it's weird. I guess it's equal parts intentional and unintentional.
And well, it's funny that you talk about censoring yourself. Jimmy yesterday was talking about performance and being able to do the right thing at the right time. And so tying that to what we're talking about, who you all think you are, or who you are, and what you think you portray to the folks around you, to your colleagues. Do you think you portray those descriptions that you just said to the people around you at your work, around here, or do you think people get you?
No, I don't think they necessarily get me, and I would imagine people agree here, but like, I feel like we're in a cul-de-sac, right? Like there's a lot of, it's safe in our cul-de-sac, and this is where I feel the safest, is around people like this. There are certainly places where we can go and I can say the same sorts of things I say on this stage, where people are looking at me cross-eyed, and you're out of touch, you don't know what you're talking about. So yeah, I mean, I think there are people that get it, and those are people that I care to be around, and there are people that completely don't get it. And frankly, I don't really care for them to get it.
And it's funny that you said that last part like that, because I kind of had to get to the point where I cared a lot less. So, I mean, for me, it is kind of because he's a nice guy most of the time. And I'm not, well, and I'm not always. I like to use sarcasm. I like to, you know, my mom, if you talk to her, she'd tell you I've been a smart, well, she wouldn't use that word. She'd say smart aleck since I was like 2.5, you know, and it's just something, you know, that's one of those things that can be taken differently. So, you know, sometimes folks think I'm being a little angry or whatever, and it's usually not that. I'm just usually having fun and talking about it the way I know how to, whatever it happens to be, so.
And oh gosh, totally lost my point. I'll let Jean answer.
Well, that's a good question. I read once where we ourselves are the only people that really can't see us. We only see ourselves in a reflection, and whether it's in a mirror or a window or whatever. And I thought a lot about that. That yeah, it's true that the only people that ever see me truly is somebody else. And so when I think about what one portrays, what an individual portrays, there's always this vacillation between chaos and stability, between who you are at the moment and who you think you are. It's unimaginable at times. You say something and people pick up on it almost completely different. And other times it's almost like they're reading your mind and they already know what you think. And I think part of that is who you are. I mean, don't ask me a question at 3:30 in the afternoon sometimes. Around that time, no, because that's a bad time for me. But for other people,
coffee.
Yeah, for coffee. But yeah, it's a question, and I guess as I grow older, that question comes up more and more and more because you reflect somewhat differently. Some of the concerns that you talked about, Matt, it isn't that I don't care anymore. It's just that you've experienced them so many times that you sort of see that pattern. And when that pattern is similar, then you, for the most part, can deal with it. It's difficult. It doesn't get easier. It almost gets harder to say, this is who I am, and to understand from people that what you portray is what they understand.
Right. And I guess you're alluding to just more life experience. Seasoning.
Yeah, the clock's winding down.
Well, so I think it's very interesting what you all said, because I'm going to reference Jimmy Marks' presentation again. Jimmy talked about being able to tell the appropriate joke at the appropriate time and knowing your audience. So when do you decide it's time to conform or edit yourself?
Well, so I think those are two very different things. Conforming and editing yourself are completely different. I'll never, ever, ever, ever conform, but I will totally edit myself.
Okay.
So there's times for talking and there's times for not talking, but I'll never put something out that I don't truly believe in.
That was really smart. That he just said. For me, it really became a matter of, I knew it was really difficult for me not to, stuff just comes to my head and I say it before I think, ever since I was a kid. And so what I've done is I've tried to spend a lot of time figuring out how other people are thinking about something. So say we're talking about culture and I'm sitting in a room with executives. Usually I put in a lot of time thinking about, okay, what's their angle? What's their, and I don't mean angle in a bad way necessarily, like a manipulative kind of thing, but everyone looks at an organization differently. If someone sees a morale issue, some people are going to think, well, we might need to clarify our procedures. Others might think we might have a structural thing. Others might think we might have some symbols and some rituals here that are awful. So just kind of trying to figure out where those people are at, and then what you need to do to actually communicate with that person in that context, right? And so sometimes, let's get straight to the facts. Sometimes it's knock them off balance a little bit with something, and then, you can get somewhere. It's just, you kind of have to adapt to the environment that you're in.
I'd say, I think everyone conforms to the point of acceptance, and then after that level, after you've established that acceptance between the individual or group and yourself, then what Matt said about self-editing comes into place, is that, how can I say this? You'd like to be treated the same way. That golden rule, I guess that's what it is, right? Mm-hmm. And I get a little upset because people say, well, you have to be nice. And I was with an organization one time that works in the downtown east side of Vancouver, and one of the individual social workers said, nice. He says, that means not in control of your emotions, right? So we're angry or whatever, and we just, okay, we'll be nice, all right? And that's I think that's destructive self-editing, right? I think we have to be transparent and honest. But it's difficult because bad hair day for somebody, they don't want to dialogue at that level, right? So.
Well, I think a good example, one that comes to mind, about 4 years ago, I wrote a blog post, and I get an email from Ron Shevlin, actually, and he said, I actually agree with your post, but I didn't expect to see something like that on your blog. It was, I mentioned politics on it. Most people in here know my politics, but it was to make a point about credit unions. It was exactly what I believed. I laid out a case exactly the way I wanted to lay it out. But I got a message from Ron that said, you know what, I agree with you, but it's not a credit union warrior type post. And I think that's self-editing, right? That's not conformity. I never put anything out that I didn't believe in. It was the fact that, you know what, you're right, Ron. Like, there's a certain expectation for what you're going to read on my site or hear from me. And I didn't hold up my end of the bargain on that.
Mm-hmm. Perfect example of knowing what your audience expects from you. So how do you think you or your brand works for your organization? Like, how does it work to the advantage? How do you think you benefit, I guess, your organization by just simply being who you are?
I've never
Uncomfortable?
I've never considered it a bit in the sense that brand is who I am. If people associate it with the organization, so be it. I can't make that decision. But I've never felt that brand or who I am. It can be affiliated, it can be associated, but it isn't. I don't represent the organization in my brand. I would represent the organization in my position as.
Right, I guess maybe I should be a little clearer. Like, your leadership in your role, whether it's HR, whether it's innovation, whether it's CEO at the credit union or general manager, how does being the type of leader you are benefit your organization?
Well, I won't talk about me personally, but we talked here today about, one of the key sort of ingredients to success, present and into the future, is recruiting top talent. And I remember back when I started working at Filene, obviously solid brand, amazing people that work there. I'm a very gifted person to be able to work with those folks. But Brent Dixon was about to join at the same time, and that had almost everything to do with me joining, is the fact that I got to work with Brent Dixon. And so when you think about personal brands, the more you allow employees to build personal brands, the more halo effect that you can have, right? I wanted to join Filene anyway, frankly, but Brent was sort of the nudge, right? The opportunity to work with Brent Dixon, amazing, right? So I think when you look at the value of a personal brand, it helps an organization in that those connections that individual has are now connections of the organization. Great. From a business side, right? But also from a talent acquisition standpoint. It's like, oh my gosh, I want to work with Steve Blishman. I want to work with Matt Lange. And you're able to sort of establish that with your connections in the brand that you've built.
I love you, Matt.
I love you too, Brent.
It's really horrible having two of us. Like, this whole couple days, people would say Matt, and I turn my head, and it's never me. It's always you. It's really kind of depressing. Yeah. Which ties my brand. I don't know. For me, it was more trying to find places like that were mutually beneficial, right? So a place that sounded like they were trying to go the same place that I wanted to go, or the stuff that was really important to me was really important to them. I mean, often when when I've been in a job interview, I'm telling them reasons not to hire me, right? So, I mean, for example, at Mazuma, I was sitting in that room and I said it probably half a dozen times, if you want like a traditional HR guru who just knows the law back and forth, up and down, can write impeccable policies, isn't going to occasionally say inappropriate things, please God do not hire me, because then, you know, a few months from now, or maybe even sooner, we're both going to be super miserable, you know? And so it was a matter of finding someplace you kind of fit, really.
Did you want to add anything? Oh, I have a question. This is a more, I guess, toward Jean and Manji. I'm just going to start calling you by last names. Okay. Do you feel better now? Somebody talk to you. So, when you all are hiring people at your credit unions, what do you want to see and hear and feel and sense about a young professional when they come in for a job?
Wow. That's probably the hardest thing to do. I think, and I have to give HR people credit because they do that every day.
They don't.
To hire somebody, and I mean, you spend so little time to know. I mean, it'd be great if I could take them on a golf course with Mr. McAlpine and then see if they how they play golf.
You could.
Yeah, you could. I don't know. You just try to see, because you know what you're going to get told, right? They're going to tell you everything that they think you want to hear. So you just try to, you know, what was the last book you read? What do you think about that? I mean, you just try to see around them more than anything.
So you appreciate somebody like Matt who comes in and says, "Don't hire me if ABC."
Yeah, because then you ask the question why, and then I mean, all of a sudden you take all that peripheral stuff that everybody goes through, and you get right down to the basic right away, and you spend quality time getting to really understand the individual.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say a pretty similar thing. For me, it's usually about trying to knock someone off balance. And this is going to sound really horrible, and I don't mean it that way, but generally, interview you is not actually you, right? Because we all have that kind of mental list of questions that we're going to get. You know, dumb stuff like, are you a team player? Well, is someone going to say no? Like, I generally hate people. I kick kittens. It's just not going to happen, you know. And so traditional interview stuff is just, it's really almost counterproductive a lot of times. And it's more like what he said. I wish it could be, and hopefully we can move in that direction. Something different, right? You know. And so I try and ask I ask everyone the same weird questions because you have to when you're in HR. But I like to ask weird, different stuff. So, you know, maybe they do stop and stutter and don't have the answer right away, but that's when I know I'm onto something, because they're having to come up with who they really are. What do they really think? And so then it's more, okay, what are the things I know that person needs for whatever that is? And for me, it doesn't really vary much functionally, right? From function to function, there's that little piece of, you know, technical expertise. But for me, it's more about, okay, I want someone who's demonstrated some level of self-awareness. They understand who they are, they have strengths, they have weaknesses, they kind of know about both of those things, they're okay talking about it. Someone who's not scared, you know, that's a big one for me, because, you know, if you're scared, you're not going to try stuff and do stuff, and that's a pretty big deal.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and bravely ask, are there any questions from the audience? Anybody wants to ask something of this wonderful panel? Miriam? Okay, hashtag not for CEOs. Was that, what'd you just say?
We've got a question.
Okay.
Actually, this question is for Jean. Jean, do you not think that your personal brand has greatly impacted your credit union's brand? Sure sounds to me like it has.
It might have, but there was no intention of that. There has never been any intention that personal thing should reflect on that. That's, you know, I'm not going to put the credit union in jeopardy at any moment through my brand. I don't believe I should. I believe that's unfair, because I also represent other organizations I deal with, right? So there's a myriad of voices that I'm accountable to, and it would be unwise to say my brand is reflected in the organizations I work with. it's difficult. I think you have to remain neutral to some point. If somebody asks me a question about the credit union or that, then I'll speak to the issue, right? But personally, if you ask me what my favorite color is, you know, I might say no comment. I don't know. It's a difficult thing.
Well, it's difficult, but if you think about what you said earlier, you're like, your brand is sort of what you do. And what you do is make Matt Lynn an amazing credit union. And
But what I do is not who I am, right?
It's part of it, isn't it? I mean,
No, I don't think so.
It's super deep.
You know, there's a lot of things that people do, right? But I think it's who you are. You know, it's the essence of who you are. You're being, right? Doing. I mean, I get paid for doing stuff, right?
But not in the way that you do it.
Right.
I mean, there are a bunch of CEOs of credit unions, and there are very, very few, if any, other Gene Bushes.
No, there's a number in British Columbia that think very similarly, right?
so Gene's brand is now humility too.
I believe that the credit union is the voice of the credit union is the board and the membership and the staff collectively, right? I can be a spokesperson, but I'm not the credit union. When I retire, what happens to my brand? That's the question I ask myself, right?
Yeah, Gene's dead wrong. There are no other Genes in BC.
Gene Autry?
See, it's funny because I would say, oh my God, I'm about to disagree with Gene. I would say you are paid for being you, rather than maybe what you do. I mean, what you do is an outgrowth of you, said Dr. Seuss. But you know what I mean? Like, that's what I think about.
And that is your brand. That kind of funny stuff right there, and building the culture of Mazuma, you know, or trying to, you know, build that culture that's, you know, kind of relaxed yet fun, and that's kind of, to me, it seems like who you are. You know what I'm saying?
Sometimes.
I got a question for Matt. Okay. And there's been other people, Brent, who's stayed in my home overnight and ate all my food. And your wife has been out. In those instances that I have been with you, we've talked about credit union, Azarov also, right? But we've also got to know each other in a level that there was no way we could get to know each other in those levels in a business environment. It had to come down to one-on-one and understanding who and your wife and talk about your kids and all that sort of stuff. And I got to really see you. I got to really see William. I got to see a lot of people in the credit union movement. That's the beauty of it. But like when I retire, next time when I retire and talk to you, I really don't want to hear about credit union. I want to hear about you. I want to hear.
Right. Well, maybe this is the height of nerddom, but what Gene is talking about. On vacation, my first family vacation in a long, long time, I visited credit union people in British Columbia and Washington. That's nerdy. You're right, but I do feel like through our connections, I mean, I've known you now 7 years, maybe? Probably 2004, 2005.
Has it been that long?
It's been a long time. And I remember the first time I went to a symposium, so it was a partnership symposium at the time, and Sherry Storm walked by. And I'm like, oh my God, that's at Storm Twitter. And I went up and I was nervous. I said, Sherry, I'm a big fan, I read your blog. And could you follow me on Twitter? She's like, oh yeah, of course. Yeah, I'll follow you on Twitter. And it was so weird. Like, I felt like I knew her, but she was like this person that was untouchable, right? She was this movie star, right? But through the years, these have become personal friends of mine through our connections. Now we tweet and we comment about credit unions, but it's also personality shines through with all of these communications, right? I know Sarah, I know you, I know Matt, and those aren't because necessarily I go to your houses for dinner. I'd love to, right? But your brand is also just that personality that seeps through with everything that you do. And so I agree with you. I'm going to be CU Warrior even if I start working at an insurance agency. Maybe not. Maybe that won't be my Twitter name. I don't know. But I think they're tied together, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is your communications as tinfoiling are still gene-glishing.
We have two questions from both Mr. Shevlin and Mr. Azaroff, so buckle up.
If Ron asks about bacon, he's in trouble, man.
No, I'm actually very confused at the moment, because for the life of me, I'm having trouble distinguishing what we're actually talking about. What's the difference between personal branding and just you being you here? I'm really not clear as to what you're doing is any different than you being you. And second, and this is a question for later, I'd love to hear from Gene's colleagues who are here, whether or not Gene's personality and brand isn't having an effect on Mountain View, because I don't agree with that comment at all. But I understand, branding, personality, what's the difference here?
I think you're actually right. I mean, again, back to, I think our original comments is none of this is intentional. I think Gene's being Gene, Matt's being Matt, and Matt's being Matt.
Basically, how did you be you, but within your professional
Well,
experience?
and not to hijack this, but Azaroff has said we need to hear from Gene's compatriots here. Would you be willing to go on the record?
Remember, I was the one that asked the happy birthday song for that lady, so here I go.
I think that we kind of had this conversation with Gene last night, and I don't think he sees what we all see, what everybody here is seeing, but that is him. He thinks he's hiding. He thinks there's a whole other person that we don't know about, but that is him. That was very kind.
To Ron's question, you intrigue me, Kellen, because you come up on the stage here and you give an unbelievable presentation, and then I look at you and I have to take this image of a Grateful Dead head out of my mind constantly. Like, those two don't equate. So the question to you is, how do those two things equate?
Yeah, Ron.
I go by the Popeye strategy. I am what I am, and that's it. You know, there's no conscious personal branding stuff. I don't get it all. I don't get the whole personal branding thing.
Well, I'm not really, well, the purpose of this anyway was not about being the whole, I forget the chef's name, so it must not be that great a brand, but the whole kicking it up, like the chef, you know? It's not about creating a brand, it's about, you know, for example, when people think about Matt, they think about innovative things and gamification and some of the stuff he's done, but that also comes from the creativity within. And so that's kind of the idea where we were going from here. And Matt, I think you were going to say something. Manji.
And this is great because one of the things I was most excited about from morning one was that Ron didn't ask me a question, and now he has circled back around and made it happen. But I think it's a kind of paradoxical thing almost, because, I mean, a brand really, I mean, it is just kind of who you are, like the stuff that you do, like it's kind of the wake of you as you're going through your life or your organization or whatever else, but at the same time, I mean, we can't deny the fact that it is something that you can manage. And, you know, if you're trying to get, I don't know, if you're trying to do something, I mean, you can align and push your identity in a certain direction or whatever else, you know. So I guess it's kind of both. You know, it's who you are, but you do still manage that.
Well, yeah, exactly. And that's like Jimmy sending an inappropriate joke to somebody to say, hey, should I put this out or not? You know, it's you, it's just how do you fit you into your organization and vice versa. Because obviously your organization, deny it or not, is going to be affected by who you are. So.
I guess I just have one comment, is that it's interesting, a lot of the people here, their affiliation came through to a digital channel in a large part. And I always find it almost unique, and this is what I think is the symposium a difference, is that there was no limitation on geography for these like minds to come together. And And I don't think that has occurred too often in the history of the world. And so when we're talking about brand and we're talking, and answering Ron's question, I think this is new to all of us in a sense, right? And maybe in 10 or 20 or 100 years we'll look back on it and say something different, but there is something unique that I don't think has been happening before. And so again, we enter into realms that there's no goalposts. We just.
What's remarkable to me is how few times, because this is our third year of doing this, is my fourth symposium overall. How few times I've met somebody that I only knew on Twitter, or my blog, or whatever else. How few times that the person's actually been different than what I expected. They look different most of the time, but in terms of how they behave and how fun they are to be around. The one exception is actually Ron Shevlin, so I'm glad we're bringing him up. I really was terrified to meet Ron Shevlin. Like, I was this guy, he's gonna rip me apart, and sometimes he does, actually. But he's like one of the nicest guys. I'm gonna ruin his brand right now, right? But he's one of the nicest guys I've ever met. He really is. But it's interesting, right? Because you're right, we're connecting from all over the place, and all we know of them is sort of their digital presence. Whether you call it a brand, you call it whatever, call it their online personality, whatever. It's amazing how, through time, for sure, the real person comes out. I mean, if you just met somebody online, you might totally misjudge how they're going to be long term. But like long term, we know who's in it to win it and who's being fake.
Okay, Miriam currently has a question for us.
Yes. Should credit union staff be allowed to use social media while at the office?
Chief Culture Officer, come on.
I am self-editing right now. Yes.
Yay!
I honestly, I don't. I mean, I know why it's a big deal, but I really don't know why it's a big deal. I mean, if someone is on social media 7 of the 8 hours they are at work and they're being unproductive, I'm not trying to be unkind, but that's just like, that's a crappy employee that's getting crappy coaching and crappy leadership. It's not a social media thing, it's a culture, organizational leadership thing. I don't know why we wouldn't want people to use social media. Why wouldn't we want people to connect with people outside the walls of our organization? Ideas don't happen in a vacuum, you know? So, I mean, think about, again, even this conference is a great example of that. If we didn't have people on social media, heck, for that first one, I don't know if anyone would have known it was happening. You know? And so, for me, it's like, why don't we, instead of asking if we should use social media, why aren't we just saying, okay, how can we really harness the power of social media? Why don't we give our people, instead of restrictions on social media, why don't we give them stuff to do on social media? Why don't we say, okay, your goal for this week is to go out and find 5 new people from credit union land and connect with them and bring us back something cool that they're doing with their credit union. Those are conversations that can never happen outside of social media. They really can't.
So I'm going to agree and disagree at the same time. I totally agree that it's a performance metric thing, right? If someone's using social media so much that they're not getting their job done, or if they're able to get their job done and still use social media, you got a performance metrics issue, right? So I understand why of course, they should be able to use social media if it fits within their job function or if it is business related. But I couldn't imagine an organization saying, you know, it's okay to be on a personal phone call, like, all the time. Because I kind of see this as like a communications vehicle. So it matters the essence of the social media, the connections, right? Like, are you using Facebook during the day to talk to your neighbor and talk to your cousin? Or are you using it to sort of further what you're trying to accomplish as an organization? You're getting paid to work at your credit union. So why are you connecting with folks that are not necessarily credit union related? So I would draw a line in the sand between personal contact, and what I mean by personal is like these personal relationships that are completely removed from credit unions. But I would say absolutely, if it's going to help your organization meet its business objectives by connecting with people in the community, people in your field of membership, absolutely rock on.
Well, our policy of the credit union is basically open. managerial person, if they haven't figured that out in their professional career, then I've hired the wrong person, right? If they're going to do things that are subject to controversy for the business that they work for, then I've hired the wrong person. So it's more a matter of trust and discussion, and I think the staff self-regulates. They know if there's an abuser, what will happen, and so if they see somebody doing that, I believe that it's discussed with them. But I think the problem is we don't understand some things that happen. You know, mothers look at their kids' Facebook things or postings or whatever. Right? It's becoming a large part of, you know, how they communicate. And so when you say absolutely no social media, then you better have another 15 rules around it, because that's the way you're going to control it. I don't believe social media should be controlled. I think that it's a channel, it's communication, so just don't abuse it. That's
So
all.
what you're kind of saying is you can control for this in two ways, right? Performance metrics and who you hire, right?
Yeah, I mean, somebody's sitting there on Facebook all day.
They're not going to get their job done if you've got them.
And Tim comes in and sees it and he goes, oh, wonder what Blation's doing.
Well, I really want to thank you all for being on the panel today, Matt, and Jean. And thank you all for sitting here and listening to us talk about ourselves, essentially. But I hope it was helpful in letting, you know, younger professionals know, you know, it's okay to be yourself, but, you know, there are things you got to do to temper that when you're in your professional setting, because you are representing your organization. And I want to, again, thank Not for CEOs, sponsor Co-op Financial Services, and our audience at home. And that's it. Thank you all.